What is reality? Why is there something rather than nothing? Is there a God? These types of questions drive us to think about reality as a whole. Now, we must first ask as to how we can even begin to ask these type of questions. In this video, I'm going to propose a theory of reality that can be supported by the tools of reason. I call this theory the foundation theory. To start off, let's first suppose that nothing exists. Now, if that were the case, then you would not be watching this video. For if there was nothing, then there would be no you. In fact, the entire point of seeking after truth would become meaningless. If you are watching this video, then there is not merely nothing. Even if you are currently dreaming, or are in a simulation, or experiencing an illusion, the dream itself, the simulation, or the illusion still exists. You cannot begin to be deceived if there is no one to be deceived. If you doubt that something exists, then doubt exists. Doubt is something, therefore something exists. This means that if something exists, then there must be a category of existence, whatever it might be. If we first to consider all of existence, then we get some interesting implications. Let's first think of reality as a whole, as a big blob. This blob includes all particles, all people, all universes, and everything else. It even includes abstract things like numbers and platonic forms. When we think of it like this, then we can define the blob of everything as referring to all that exists. So by definition, the blob of everything is all that exists. The first implication is that no existing thing is outside the blob of everything. The blob of everything, by definition, includes all existing things. Therefore, whatever is not included in the blob of everything does not exist. The second principle is that nothing outside the blob of everything caused the blob of everything to exist. In fact, this can be shown by a basic syllogism. Premise 1. The blob of everything includes all that exists. Premise 2. Therefore, no existing thing is outside the blob of everything. Premise 3. Therefore, no existing cause is outside the blob of everything. Conclusion. Therefore, no existing thing outside the blob of everything caused the blob of everything to exist. In short, this simply means that nothing is outside the blob of everything, and therefore nothing outside the blob of everything caused the blob. This argument rules out a transcendent cause of everything, for if there was some sort of transcendent cause of all things, then this transcendent cause would still be part of the blob of everything. So, to avoid this contradiction, we should distinguish between something that transcends all and something that transcends all else. Nothing can transcend all, or nothing is beyond all, therefore nothing outside existence causes existence. Because of this, we get a third implication. Nothing outside the blob of everything explains why or how the blob of everything exists. So just as nothing outside the blob of everything caused the blob of everything to exist, so too, nothing outside the blob of everything could serve as its ultimate explanation. Now this is strange, because it seems like things in our ordinary experiences do have outside explanations and causes. Every chunk of reality, big or small, appears to depend upon other things. However, the blob of everything is an exception. The blob of everything is self-sufficient. Now, let's suppose that the blob of everything includes only things that have an outside explanation. Things like houses, chairs, or planets. Then the issue is, how can things that have an outside explanation add up to something that does not have an outside explanation? Things like houses, chairs, and planets all have a dependent nature. Their existence depends on prior causes. But now, let's take these dependent things and try to have it occupy all of reality. But then this contradicts its dependent nature. To solve this problem, I propose the foundation theory. This means that dependent things cannot exist without some foundation that makes them exist. The foundation provides the ultimate basis for the existence of everything else. The foundation of things enables that there are things as opposed to there being nothing at all. Now, if we say that all of reality is self-sufficient, in other words, there is nothing outside of reality, but yet dependent things in reality do exist, then there must be some foundation. Now, since we have established that reality is self-sufficient, then that self-sufficient realm must contain some independent layer or component. The blob of everything has no outside cause or outside explanation. However, things within our universe, such as a car, are not like that. Something beyond the car made the car, as well as the things inside of the car. We can account for the difference between the car and the blob of everything in terms of independence. The blob of everything includes something that has an independent nature. This independent nature is the engine of existence that enables the totality to exist. A car, by contrast, only exists because something produced it. A car has a dependent nature, and so for this reason a car cannot be the foundation of all existence. We can further show this when we make the distinction between dependent and independent. Things that are dependent are things that depend upon some reality beyond itself. Things that are independent are things that do not depend upon anything beyond themselves. An argument can be used to show that the foundation has an independent nature. Premise 1. A room cannot be self-sufficient without an independent layer. Premise 2. The blob of everything is a self-sufficient realm. Therefore, the blob of everything has an independent foundation. Now, another thing we should establish is what is called a construction error. Purely dependent things, by themselves, cannot construct a self-sufficient totality. This is due to the fact that a self-sufficient totality from nearly dependent things commits a construction error. For example, to construct a non-white floor from white tiles commits a construction error. And in general, adding dependent things together results in a dependent total. This is why without a foundation, every layer of reality is dependent, and so they cannot construct an independent totality. Even if a floor exists for an infinite amount of time, the floor still depends on its tiles for as long as they exist. So then, purely dependent things cannot form independent totals, even if the dependent things have existed forever. And so let's take a step back for a moment and realize the implications. First, there's nothing outside the blob of everything. Secondly, the blob of everything contains dependent things which cannot form an independent totality, even if the dependent things have existed forever. And so a foundation theory explains why reality exists. Without an independent nature, we have a construction problem. Now, despite this, we have another problem as to why the foundation exists at all. The question remains as to how can anything or any foundation be independent? Well, the reason has to do with necessity. To first understand a necessary nature, we must first understand what lacks a necessary nature. Something that lacks a necessary nature could fail to exist at any time. Something with a necessary nature, however, cannot fail to exist. The Greek philosopher Aristotle explained this in terms of potentiality. Philosophers these days talk about possible worlds, and the basic concept is that a possible world is a complete way reality might possibly have been. So, there is a possible world in which there are fewer planets or galaxies. We can distinguish between a necessary thing and a non-necessary thing by the language of possible worlds. A non-necessary thing can exist, but it only exists in some possible worlds. A necessary thing, by contrast, exists in all possible worlds. The foundation of reality can have an independent nature by having a necessary nature. By the necessity of its existence, the foundation is able to have an independent foundation. In other words, a foundation that has a necessary nature has no potential not to exist. The foundation, therefore, would have a special nature that explains how it can exist without depending on anything. Because the foundation has an independent and necessary nature to it, then it also has an ultimate nature. The foundation exists by having a self-sufficient, necessary nature, and everything above the foundation has an explanation in terms of whatever actualized it. So, to summarize, the foundation theory makes sense of three things. It makes sense of how the totality of everything can lack an outside cause or explanation. It can account for construction errors, and that purely dependent things cannot be the basis for self-sufficiency of the totality of things. The foundation theory makes sense of the difference between the potential realities and actual realities. A potential reality is actual only if something actualizes it. If instead the totality of dependent realities lacks any actualization, then nothing accounts for its existence. The entire totality would then be a mere potential. But we know that there are actual things, and so there must be some sort of actualizer of dependent realities. This actualizer is actual by its very nature, and so it has a necessary nature. With all this in mind, then the foundation theory makes sense of how there could be anything at all. And that is the basic idea behind the foundation theory. Throughout the rest of this series, we are going to try and understand what the nature of the foundation is. I encourage viewers to keep an open mind as we go through what we can deduce from reason. This video was made possible by the work of Josh Rasmussen. I want to thank him for his work, as well as being an inspiration for diving deep into the nature of reality. In the next video, we will be responding to the most common objections to the foundation theory.